Why does a country obsessed with cultural preservation hide its greatest archaeological treasure from the world? Okinoshima is only 0.97 square kilometers, yet it holds 80,000 artifacts untouched for 1,600 years. No tourist can visit it. No scientist can freely excavate it. Even photographing it up close is virtually impossible. This tiny island floats alone in the Sea of Japan, 60 kilometers from any civilization, carrying a secret that changed everything we knew about ancient Japan. But here's the paradox. The more Japan hides it, the more famous it becomes. How can a completely invisible place be so present in the global imagination? The answer begins 16 centuries ago, when desperate sailors transformed an isolated rock into an altar to the gods. They left gold, swords, mirrors, and jewels before crossing the deadliest strait in Asia. And something extraordinary happened. No one ever stole these offerings. Not thieves, not conquerors, not wars. Everything remained exactly where it was left. Why? Because Okinoshima isn't protected by walls or guards. It's protected by something more powerful. Taboo. A taboo so deep it survived empires, modernization, and even democracy. Today, that taboo became law. And Japan decided that some treasures are too valuable to be seen. But are they protecting history or hiding something more? For centuries, this island served as a post between worlds. Between Japan and the Asian continent. Between land and sea, between humans and gods. First, it was a military lookout, then a spiritual refuge. Today, it's a frozen time capsule. And in 2017, when UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, the world expected it would finally open. But Japan did the opposite, closed it completely. Today, not even archaeologists can enter without years of negotiation. A single priest lives there, alone, in 10-day shifts. No internet, no phone. Just him and the gods, and this radical isolation raises a profound question. How can such a small island be at the center of everything? Okinoshima sits exactly between Japan and the Korean peninsula, in the middle of the Tsushima Strait. It looks insignificant on the map. A point lost in infinite blue. But 1,600 years ago, this geographical position was a matter of life and death for an entire nation. Ancient Japan was emerging as an organized civilization. It desperately needed Chinese technology, Korean allies, Buddhist texts, agricultural knowledge, and all of this came by sea. But crossing that strait was playing dice with death. Storms appeared out of nowhere, transforming calm water into liquid mountains within minutes. Currents changed direction without warning. Ships disappeared with hundreds of men aboard, swallowed by the sea. No map helped. No experience guaranteed return. Why is the sea there so treacherous? Because 3 ocean currents collide violently at that exact point. The Tsushima Current coming from the tropical south, freezing waters from Siberia descending from the north, and chaotic and unpredictable coastal currents. The result is pure liquid chaos. 5-meter waves appear under blue skies. Giant whirlpools suck vessels to the bottom. Dense fogs like walls erase any sense of direction. For wooden ships of the 5th century, crossing that strait was calculated suicide. So ancient Japanese did something ingenious. They transformed geographical fear into religious faith. Okinoshima, strategically positioned in the middle of the route, became a sacred sanctuary to the kami, the Shinto gods of the sea. Before crossing the strait, sailors, diplomats, and even members of the imperial family stopped obligatorily at the island. They performed elaborate purification rituals. They fasted, they bathed in freezing waters, and they left their most valuable possessions as offerings to the gods. Worked gold, polished bronze, ceremonial swords, sacred mirrors considered divine portals, all in exchange for a single promise: safe passage. Why were 80,000 precious objects never stolen in 16 centuries? Think about the improbability of this. 80,000 artifacts of gold, bronze, iron, jade, and precious stones, left exposed on a deserted island, without armed guards, without security cameras, during bloody civil wars, devastating Mongol invasions, centuries of political instability, even American military occupation after 1945. And no one touched absolutely anything. Seems impossible, right? But it happened. And the reason isn't divine magic. It's something much more powerful in Japanese culture. Absolute psychological terror. The Shinto priests of Okinoshima created a taboo so deep that violating the island was considered worse than death. Stealing from Okinoshima meant directly offending the kami, and offending the kami didn't just bring personal bad luck. It brought a curse upon your entire family, your ancestors, your descendants. 7 generations back and 7 forward would pay for your blasphemy. Your crops would rot. Your children would fall ill. Storms would destroy your village. And when you died, your spirit would wander eternally without rest. This wasn't abstract fear. It was visceral terror rooted in the Japanese collective psyche. And it worked perfectly. Even professional thieves, cruel pirates, and warlords desperate for resources avoided Okinoshima like the plague. But the taboo did more than protect objects. It created perfect and unique archaeological conditions in the world. The offerings were left exactly where they fell. Rain and time gradually covered them with layers of soil. Each generation of pilgrims deposited their gifts in different areas of the island, creating clear stratigraphy. Century after century, era after era, dynasty after dynasty, until Okinoshima literally became a living 3-dimensional archive of Japanese cultural, technological, and religious evolution. When archaeologists finally excavated in the 1950s, they were absolutely stunned. It was like opening a library sealed for 1,000 years. Each layer told a different story. How can an archaeological treasure completely change a nation's history? Okinoshima's artifacts destroyed a comfortable lie that Japan had been telling itself for centuries. During decades of militaristic nationalism, the Japanese government taught that the country developed in isolation, protected by the sea, independent of contaminating external influences. A unique, pure civilization born from insular Japanese exceptionalism. School textbooks reinforced this. Imperial propaganda glorified this. And millions of Japanese fervently believed this. But Okinoshima exploded this narrative into 1,000 pieces. The offerings proved sophisticated commercial, cultural, and religious connections linking Japan, Korea, China, India, and even Persia through the maritime Silk Road. Chinese bronze mirrors from the Wei dynasty, gold rings with Korean techniques, Persian glass beads that traveled 8,000 kilometers. Even Roman coins were found. Ramang, ancient Japan wasn't isolated. It was deeply integrated into a global network of trade, ideas, and power. Even more revealing, the artifacts show Buddhist influence arriving in Japan centuries before historians imagined. Buddha statuettes appear in layers dated to the 5th century, when officially Buddhism would only arrive in the 6th century. Someone was lying, or the official chronology was wrong. But Okinoshima revealed something even more disturbing about the birth of the Japanese state. The offerings weren't random gifts from superstitious fishermen. They were officially sponsored by the imperial court of Yamato. They were carefully orchestrated political rituals disguised as pure religious devotion. Each sword left on the island represented a promise of military loyalty to the emperor. Each bronze mirror symbolized divine legitimacy transferred from the gods to the throne. Each jewel sealed political alliances under the witness of the kami. Okinoshima was the secret altar where earthly power met celestial power, where kings became divine, where politics became religion, and where ancient Japan negotiated its own identity. Why does modern Japan still treat Okinoshima as untouchable sacred territory? You'd expect a country that rapidly industrialized, that built skyscrapers and bullet trains, that became a global technological power, to abandon ancient superstitions. But no. Even after the forced modernization of the Meiji era in 1868, even after defeat in World War II when Emperor Hirohito publicly renounced his divinity in 1946, even after decades of secularization and Western influence, the rules about Okinoshima not only remained, they became stricter. Why? Because for Shintoism, Japan's native religion, there's no distinction between past and present when it comes to the sacred. Okinoshima wasn't a sacred place. It still is. The gods didn't leave when the modern world arrived. The kami still inhabit every rock, every ancient tree, every wave that hits the shore. And interrupting them would be a spiritual catastrophe with real and measurable consequences. This belief is so ingrained that only a single Shinto priest lives on the island, completely alone in 10-day shifts. He wakes before dawn wrapped in fog. He performs meticulous daily rituals to the sea gods, He maintains 3 clean and functional shrines. He prepares simple offerings of salt, rice, and sake. And he spends his days in total monastic silence and absolute solitude. No phone, no internet, no radio, no other human being. Only the sound of waves, wind in the pines, and his own breathing. When his shift ends after 10 days, a boat comes to pick him up quickly. Another priest immediately takes over. There's no overlap. There's no conversation between them about experiences on the island. Solitude and silence are essential parts of the ritual. But there's another equally important reason for Okunoshima's extreme isolation: rigorous scientific preservation. UNESCO, when declaring the island a World Heritage Site in 2017, demanded that Japan protect it completely. How can stepping on an island be a cultural crime? Today, visiting Okunoshima is effectively impossible for any ordinary person. It's not technically illegal under Japanese law, but in social practice, it's a very serious moral transgression. The Munakata Taisha Shinto Shrine, which has administered the island for over 1,000 uninterrupted years, totally prohibits public access. The Japanese Coast Guard constantly patrols the waters, preventing unauthorized boats from approaching. And even if you miraculously manage to arrive, the social pressure would be psychologically overwhelming. Because in Japan, disrespecting the sacred isn't just formally illegal, it's culturally unthinkable. It's a shame that permanently marks you and your family. But it wasn't always so absolutely restricted. Until the 1970s, small groups of selected men could visit Okunoshima once a year, during the Minato Matsuri festival. But the rules were extremely severe and physically challenging. Participants had to undergo purification rituals that lasted entire days. Complete fasting from meats and impure foods, repeated cold baths in seawater. And on the morning of the visit, they had to swim completely naked in the freezing waters around the island, symbolically cleansing all accumulated spiritual impurities. Only then could they step on sacred ground. During the entire visit to the island, absolute silence was mandatory. No casual conversation. Only whispered prayers. And when they finally left after a few hours, they couldn't take absolutely anything as a souvenir. No stones, no branches, no shells, no detailed photographs. Nothing from Okunoshima could leave Okunoshima physically or even in shared memory. Gradually over the decades, even these limited visits were progressively canceled. First, women were completely prohibited from approaching the island, a controversial rule that generated heated international debates about gender discrimination versus respect for cultural traditions. Japanese feminist groups publicly protested. UNESCO expressed diplomatic concern. But the Munakata Shrine didn't yield an inch. Why does prohibiting something make it irresistibly fascinating? Here's the perfect paradox. By making Okunoshima completely invisible and inaccessible, Japan unintentionally made it world famous. Today, the island is globally known as Japan Forbidden's Island, or the island no one can visit. International documentaries have been produced about it. Popular books dedicate entire chapters. Journalistic articles in dozens of languages speculate about its hidden secrets. And literally millions of people around the world dream, fantasize, and obsess about visiting it. Precisely because they never can? Psychologists call this the scarcity effect, or reactance theory. We intensely want what is denied to us. We value the inaccessible more than the available. And Okunoshima has become the ultimate forbidden fruit of world archaeology. But this raises a deeply important philosophical question about cultural heritage. What's more important? Democratic accessibility or absolute preservation? In the West, especially after the Enlightenment and democratic revolutions, we tend to fervently believe that cultural heritage equally belongs to all humanity. That museums should be open public institutions. That everyone, regardless of class, gender, or nationality, should be able to see, study, and learn from historical artifacts. That knowledge cannot be monopolized by nations, religions, elites, or priests. It's a fundamental principle of modern open societies. But Japan fundamentally and philosophically disagrees. For them, some things are literally too sacred to be democratized. Some things lose their essential meaning, their soul, when they become public spectacle. When they're compulsively photographed, commercially touristified, globally commodified. And Okunoshima is exactly one of them. Western critics passionately argue that this is indefensible cultural elitism, that it hides important history from all humanity. that it perpetuates archaic gender inequality. And they have absolutely valid points. How can the sacred demand distance in the 21st century? Okinoshima isn't alone in the Japanese philosophy of preservation through isolation. Mount Omin, in Nara Prefecture, has prohibited women for an incredible 1,300 consecutive years. The Aokigahara Forest, although technically accessible, is treated with morbid reverence and respectful silence for being the site of hundreds of annual suicides. The Imperial Palace in Kyoto maintains internal areas permanently closed where not even the emperor himself regularly enters. Shrines and eyes are demolished and identically rebuilt every 20 years, but never photographed during rituals. Japan is full of forbidden places, and they all share exactly the same fundamental Shinto logic. Genuine sacredness requires reverent distance. This philosophy comes directly from a central belief of Shintoism that the West rarely deeply understands. Nature and certain specific places are literal and physical dwellings of gods, the kami. They're not poetic symbols. They're not philosophical metaphors. They're not artistic representations. They're real, living, conscious, and incredibly powerful presences. And disturbing these presences brings direct, measurable, and devastating spiritual consequences. For secular and scientific Western mentalities, this inevitably seems irrational or remnant primitive superstition. But for deep Japan, it's profoundly logical and self-evident. If you genuinely believe that a specific god physically inhabits a particular mountain, you absolutely don't transform that mountain into a tourist destination with modern cable cars, noisy snack bars, and thousands of daily selfies. You zealously protect it. You permanently respect it. You always maintain reverent distance. And Okinoshima is the absolute and maximum example of this logic taken to its purest extreme. It's not just casually sacred. It's the most sacred place in absolutely the entire Japanese archipelago, because precisely there occurred the imperial rituals that legitimized the formation of the Japanese state during crucial centuries. Why does a sacred island become a political weapon? Okinoshima lies dangerously close to the Takeshima Islands, territory fiercely disputed between Japan and South Korea for over 70 years. The region is strategically vital for both nations. It controls commercial maritime routes that move trillions of dollars annually. It contains extremely valuable fishing reserves. And it possibly hides substantial deposits of oil and natural gas in the seabed. And Japan intelligently uses Okinoshima as historical justification for its controversial territorial claims. The argument is ingeniously simple. If Japanese performed official religious rituals on Okinoshima continuously for 1,600 years, this proves uninterrupted historical presence in that maritime region. This proves that the Sea of Japan is in fact historically and culturally Japanese. At least that's exactly what Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs argues diplomatically. South Korea vehemently and angrily disagrees. They argue that Okinoshima was too isolated to serve as a real territorial base, that religious rituals don't establish modern legal sovereignty, and that Japan is cynically manipulating cultural heritage for contemporary political gains. And suddenly, Okinoshima is no longer just a sacred island of archaeological interest. It's a sharp diplomatic weapon in heated geopolitical dispute. So the uncomfortable question arises that no one wants to publicly ask. Does Japan protect Okinoshima out of genuine religious faith or calculated political strategy? The honest answer is probably both simultaneously. And this isn't remotely unique to Japan. Sacred places have always been used politically throughout human history. Jerusalem justifies Israeli and Palestinian territorial claims. Mecca legitimizes Saudi authority. Tibet symbolizes cultural resistance against Chinese domination. When strategic geography and religious faith meet in the same place, political power is never far away. But does this necessarily make Okinoshima less spiritually special or less archaeologically valuable? Not necessarily. So we return to the deeper initial question. Why exactly does Japan keep Okinoshima completely forbidden? Because it represents everything that modern Japan fears losing in accelerated globalization. Its millennial tradition in an increasingly westernized country. Its contemplative silence in an era of constant digital noise. Its preserved mystery in a world where absolutely everything is one Google click away. Its sacred space in an increasingly secular society. Okinoshima forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Not everything needs to be accessible to be genuinely valuable. Not everything needs to be seen to be profoundly respected. Not everything needs to be shared to be authentically preserved. And some things, perhaps the most spiritually important ones, must remain absolutely untouched. Is this frustrating for archaeologists, historians, and global curious minds? Absolutely yes. Is it unfair to billions of people who would like to learn, explore, experience this unique piece of human history? Perhaps yes, but it's also profoundly, undeniably human, because deep in our collective psyche, we all have our own personal forbidden places. Memories we don't share with anyone. Feelings we don't explain even to ourselves. Parts of our soul we keep in absolute secret. Okinoshima is Japan's collective secret, and they consciously chose to keep it. Is this unjustifiable cultural selfishness? Or is it the only realistic way to protect something truly sacred in a capitalist world that transforms absolutely everything into consumption, product, and selfie? There's no easy answer. But one single thing is absolutely certain. As long as Okinoshima remains closed, inaccessible, and mysterious, it will continue to irresistibly fascinate us. Because the forbiddens will always be psychologically irresistible. And mystery will always be infinitely more powerful than any revealed truth. The island remains there, alone, silent, invisible, waiting.